Hello everyone, I am Arjun S. Meda, a Senior Developer Evangelist with Automation Anywhere. And in this video, we are going to look at how we can solve Bot Wars Week 3 challenge on the theme Human Resources. Now let's take a quick look at the challenge page and then we will build a bot to solve the challenge. Here is the challenge page, and the objective for this challenge is to migrate the employee data from a thick client Windows application, and also some of the information is there in a HR onboarding API. We want to get the details from both these applications and then feed the data into a new system of record, that is the BusyBees Resource Management web application. So as we can see here is the link to download the legacy app, and then there is a HR onboarding API, and then here is the web application which generates random employee number whenever you launch this page or after you click on the submit button here. So as soon as you get this employee number, we go to the legacy app here. So we will first download this app, and then I'm going to extract the executable from this zip file. Now let's launch this application. The employee number generated from the web app we need to enter here and click on search. So now we are going to get all the information corresponding to this employee number, and the next is to invoke the HR onboarding API. Let's copy this entire. I will paste the endpoint here, and now let's replace the hard-coded word called employee ID with the real value which we just got it from the web app, and then I'll click on enter. Here you will get information like phone number and the start date corresponding to the employee ID. Now let's go back. I also wanted to add one point of note. Whenever you launch this application for the first time, you might get a notification something like this. Let me show you. Here I'm in a virtual machine now. So if I just launch this, you may get a pop-up saying the publisher could not be verified. Don't worry about this. We have developed it internally here by our team, and you can comfortably click on run button here, and then the application will launch fine. If you want to take a look at how the code looks like for this application, it's also available on our Automation Anywhere GitHub repository. So feel free to take a look at the code as well. Now let's switch back. And once we get the details, we will have to start entering it into all these fields and then click on submit button. You will see that there are overall 11 fields. And for now, since I just did not enter any data, it is giving me that I've correctly submitted 0 fields because I did not enter anything. So we will have to do this 10 times, and then it will show us the accuracy and the time taken to complete this bot. Now let's start building this bot. To start with, we will use action called step so that we can organize the entire bot into different steps which we want to perform one by one. In the actions, I'll look for the action called step. I'll use 4 steps at the first higher level here. So I'll drag and drop it 4 times. Now let's start adding information into all these steps. The first step is to download the legacy app. I'll enter the same here. The second step is to launch the BusyBees application. So now we have the step with the description called launch BusyBees application, and the third step will be to migrate employees. And the last step is a cleanup where we will close the Windows application which we have opened earlier. And now let's start adding the actions into each of these steps. I'll click on save. To download the legacy app, as we have seen here, this particular button has a link to the legacy app downloadable. So what I'll do is I'll right click and say copy link address, and then I'll go here, and for me I want to download the application from this link. So I'll type in the word called download, and you will see that under the browser package there is an action called download file. Drag and drop it here, and then on the right side let's configure the properties. The URL of the file, I'll enter the entire path here, and let's give it a location to be saved. So I'll enter it as C temp, and then I'll use the same name whatever it has for this particular zip file. And I'll also select overwrite existing file, so that just in case if it's already there, the bot will not stop. Instead it will just overwrite the application. So now this step will download the application. The next step is to unzip this particular file which we have downloaded. For that I'll look for an action called unzip, which is available under the package called folder. I'll drag and drop it here, and then let's give the zip file name which we have already used here. I'll copy this from here and then paste it here. In the extract to path field, I'll just add C temp so that the executable will be stored in this particular folder. Now the next step is to launch the application. For that I'll use an action called open. Under application you will have an action called open program / file. I'm going to drag and drop it here. And now we have to specify the location of the program or the file. I'll just copy it from here, that is C temp, and then backslash, it's going to be with the same name. I'm going to copy the name from here, that is employee list. I'll paste it here, .exe. So that's the location of the executable for the TIC client. I'll click on save. Now let's run this bot and check if it is able to download the file, extract it, and then launch the application as well. So whatever I already have, I'm going to close it here. Now let's go to the temp folder. So this is where it is going to download the zip file, extract the executable, and then launch the application. I'll click on run. We'll give it a few seconds for it to download the file. So let's keep this screen open so that you will be able to see the file being downloaded. As you can see here, it has downloaded the zipped file, and now it's going to extract the application, and then it is also going to launch this legacy app now. I think it's behind. Okay, now we can see that the legacy app is launched. So that's the first step we wanted to do. So let's minimize this. Now the next step is to launch the BusyBees application. For that, I'll use the browser package and then use the action called open. I'll drag and drop it here. In the browser, I'll select it as Chrome, and then in the link to open, I'm going to copy the URL from here. Copy this and come back here and enter the path here. So this should launch the application. Now the time to get the employee ID, which is randomly generated by the BusyBees resource management application. Let's see how we can do that. Now we will move on to the third step, that is the migrate employees. Within this step, again, let's organize it into much more smaller steps here. First, we want to read the employee ID. For that, again, I'm going to use a step here. I'll drag and drop it here. I'll call this as read employee ID. I'll click on save. Next, I'll use one more step. Here I'm going to say read the data from the legacy app. And then I'll use one more step in which I'm going to add read data from API. And then one more step action in which I'll say migrate the employees data. Click on save. Now let's start filling each of these fields. In the read employee ID, I'll use an action called recorder capture. So I'll type the word recorder here. I'll drag and drop the action called capture. Now let's configure the properties. We want to get the employee ID from the BusyBees resource page application. So I'll select browser, click on refresh. It's going to pull up all the open browser instances. I'll select the Automation Anywhere Labs, that is employee data migration. Click on capture object. And now here is the employee ID, which is 1010 in this instance. I'll click on this and it'll start identifying that particular data value. Now here, what we want to do is we want to extract the data from that particular field. So what I'll do is I'll say get property, and in the property name, we will have to define the property name which will contain the particular value we are looking for. Let's see which field has that value. I'll expand this object properties, scroll down till I see that value called 1010. So here we have 1010. Corresponding attribute name is HTML value. I'll copy this, come here and paste it on the property name and scroll down. The value which it is going to extract, we want to save it into a variable. For that, I'll create a variable here. I'll click on create variable and give it a name as employee ID, since it's going to be a string. I'll click on create and select. So now we have read the employee ID. So now we want to enter this employee ID into the legacy app and then get the corresponding fields for that employee. For that, again, I'm going to use the recorder capture action in this step called read the data from the legacy application. So here we want to enter the employee ID into the Windows application. So I'll select application here, click on refresh, and now it will pull down all the Windows apps I have open. So I'm going to use employee database and click on capture object. And now I'll navigate to this particular field and I'll click here. So now it will start identifying the properties for that particular application, the field. And the action we want to take on this particular object is we want to set the text. So what is the value we want to set, which is stored in the variable called employee_id. So I'll click on F2 and select employee_id here and then click on insert. Now let's double check on the properties. The key attribute value with which it is going to identify this object is this value called ID. So now we have entered the value into this employee ID field. Next is to click on the search button. I'm going to drag and drop the recorder capture action here. Select the same application, that is employee database, and then click on capture object. And now I'll highlight this search button and click on it. And the action we want to perform on this object is click. So I'm going to select the property called click from this drop down and we are good to go now. I'll click on save. Now that we have entered the data into that employee ID field and clicked on the search button, we will get all the relevant information corresponding to that employee now. So if I go to this application and enter a value and click on search button, now we are going to see all the values for the different fields mentioned here. Now we will start extracting the value from each of these fields. There are overall 9 fields from which we want to extract information. So I'm going to use the recorder capture action 9 times. I'll drag and drop it here for the first time, and then I'll select the application and identify the employee database here. Click on capture object, and then I'll select this first name text field. So now to extract the value from that field, I'll select the option called get property. And now let's see which is the property which contains that value. For that, I'm going to expand the object properties. Let's look at which field contains that particular value. Here, there are two fields, item value and value. So I'll go with this value. I'll copy this and then I'll paste it in the property name. That means whatever is there in the property called value, it is going to be captured, and now we want to store this into a variable. So I'll click on create variable and then give it a name called first name. Click on create and select. So now we want to do this for all the remaining 8 fields. For that, I'll just click on save, and then I'll copy and paste this recorder capture action for 8 more times. I'll copy this and then I'll keep pasting it here 8 more times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So now we have 9 steps added here. Let's go to the second step, and then I'll select recapture object. And now I'm going to identify this field which is connected to the last name. And everything else remains the same because the property name, everything will be the same here. And then we just want to change the variable name. So now I'll create a variable called last name. Click on create and select. Now let's move on to the next action. I'll click on recapture object and identify this email field. Scroll down and create a new variable called email ID. Click on create and select. Now let's move to the next one. Same, very similar steps. Click on recapture object, identify the city field, and then we will create a variable called city to store the value extracted from the city field. Click on create and select. Now the next step, again same step. Click on recapture object, identify the zip, and create a new variable called zip. Click on create and select. Now let's move on. We have 4 more steps to complete to get the data from this Windows app. I'll click on recapture object and then I'll select the job title. Create a new variable called job title. Click on create and select. Let's move to the next one. Click on recapture object. I'll identify the department field this time. And then create a new variable called department. Click on create and select. The next step, recapture object. I'll identify the manager field. And then create a new variable called manager. Click on create and select. And the last field, click on recapture object and identify the state field. And then I'll create a variable to store this value called state. I'll call this state. Click on create an object. Now we have got all the required fields for that corresponding employee from that Windows thick client application. Now we have to get phone number and the start date from this REST API. So for that, I'm going to use the REST get method. Under the REST web services package, I'll drag and drop this get method here. And then I want to add the URI. I'll go here and copy this particular endpoint and then come back here, add the URI here. And I don't want to hard code this particular value. So I'm going to remove this and then I'll click on F2 and then select the employee ID and then click on S insert. Now we will start getting the response in the format of JSON. Now let's store the JSON response in a variable. I'll click on add variable mapping and then the JSON response, we can extract the information from the JSON response using the key called body, and then I'll also create a new variable to store this entire JSON response. I'll call this as rest response. Click on create and select and then I'll click on add. So now we have added the URI with the employee ID variable. So if I put it in a loop, then it'll start picking up with whatever value is there in that particular variable name called employee ID, and then it'll save it into a variable called rest response. And now to read the values, we will use the JSON object manager package, which is available in the bot store. So there was a specific video created to learn how to use this specific package. So if you have not checked that out earlier, please go and take a look at it. However, we are also going to look at how you can use this package at a high level here. So I'll type in JSON object manager, and this contains three actions. The first one is the initialize. So this will set up a session with which you can use the query action to query a particular value, or you can also use set action to update the value in that particular JSON variable as well. So first we will drag and drop the action called initialize, and here we want to enter the JSON object which we just saved here. I'll click on F2 and then select rest response and then click on S insert. It's going to give me a string saying if it was a valid JSON or not. I'm just going to save it into prompt assignment. Next, we will use the action called query. Drag and drop it here. In the JSON query string, we have to define what we are looking for. Let's go to the endpoint here. As we can see, we have phone number and the start date connected to the employee ID. So I'm going to copy this phone number here and then come back and paste it here. So this will give me the value stored corresponding to the key called phone number. I'm going to create a new variable to store the phone number and add a name called as phone number. Click on create and select. Similarly, I will add one more query to get the start date as well. I'll go here and then copy this start date key and paste it here in the JSON query string. And this value, I'll store it in a new variable called start date. Click on create and select. Now we have all the data we need to enter it into the web application. So the next step is to enter the data into the web application. Before that, I'll click on save. Again, we are going to start using the recorder capture action. I'll drag and drop it here within the migrate employees data. Let's go back to our challenge page to see how many fields we have. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And then finally clicking on the submit button. So we need 11 recorder capture actions. So first we have this first one, recorder capture action. I'll click on browser, identify the web application, that is employee data migration, click on capture object, and then place my cursor onto the text field connected to first name. And we want to enter the data into this particular field. So the action to take on this object is to set text, and in the keystrokes, we'll select the variable which will contain the data for that variable called first name. I'll click on F2 and then select first name, click on S insert. So now we want to repeat this for all the remaining 11 steps. Let's do that. Before I copy paste the recorder capture actions, just click on save. And then I'm going to copy this 11 more times. I'll click on copy and then paste. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and 11. So now let's start configuring each of these actions. Now I'm in the second action here. This we want to enter it into the last name. So I'll click on recapture object and I'll go and identify this last name field. Scroll down, the remaining properties will remain same, like we want to set the text here and the data is stored in the variable called last name. So I'm going to change the variable to pick up the variable called last name. Click on S insert. Let's move on to the next one. Click on recapture object. I'll identify the phone number. And then the variable, I'll update it to pick up the value from the variable called phone number. Click on S insert. Let's keep moving to the next steps. I'll click on recapture object and then I'll identify email address and change the variable here to email address. I'll click on S insert. Now to the next one, I'll click on recapture object. Now it's time to pick up the data to be entered into the field city. I'll place my cursor here. Now let's change the variable here to S city. I'll select it from the drop down and click on S insert. And next one, again I'll click on recapture object and this time we want to select the state value from the drop down. I'm going to highlight the drop down here. Now we are not actually going to set the text here. Instead we are going to select the value by the text. So I'm going to change the action to be taken on the object. I'll select it as select item by text. And here in the assign value, I'll select the variable called state so that it will pick up the value whatever is there in the state and it will look for that value in that entire drop down and then it will select that particular value. I'll click on S insert. Now moving on to the next one, I'll click on recapture object and this time it is entering data into the field called zip. Place my cursor here and I'll change the variable to szip by clicking on F2. I'll select this szip here, click on S insert. Next step, again same thing, click on recapture object, select job title and then we'll change the variable here to job title. Click on S insert. The next step, same thing, recapture object. Now we want to select the value from the drop down department. I'll click here and in the action to be taken, we'll select the option called select item by text and then in the assign value, I'll select the variable called S department. Click on S insert. Moving on to the next step, clicking on recapture object. Now I'll select the start date field. and variable, I'll change it to s star date, and then click on s insert. Next step, recapture object, identify the field manager, and we're going to change the variable here to s manager. Click on s insert. Now we are done with entering data into this, all the fields here. Now time to click on the submit button. I'll click on recapture object and identify this button called submit, and the action we want to take is click here. So now this should kind of complete one iteration for us. It's going to read the data from the web application, that is the employee ID, and then it will look for the corresponding data in the legacy application and then come back and feed the data into this web app. Let's see how this works so far. I hope we have done everything correctly. Let's check this out. I'm going to close my browsers. Now let's run the bot and see how it performs. I'll click on run button. It's going to first download the legacy application. It will unzip and then launch the client, and then it will launch the web application, look for that employee ID and enter that into the Windows client application, get all the corresponding fields and also the fields from the API, and then it's going to enter all the data into the web application. Let's see which of these steps work fine. I'm hoping all the steps should work fine and it should be able to successfully complete one iteration. Let's give it a few seconds for it to complete all the steps. And so far it has been taking all the data fine and updating it here. And then yes, as we can see here, it completed one iteration of this challenge and we can see that it has correctly updated 11 fields now. Now we want to do this overall 10 times because that's what the challenge page says. So let's put all these steps into a loop and make it run this for 10 times. I'll go back to my bot, click on close. I'll change my view from flow to list because it will be easier to see all these steps. So what I'll do is I'll look for an action called loop and then drag and drop it here within the migrate employees step, and let me minimize all the steps so that it's easier to move it within the loop. I'm just going to select all these steps and then move it into the loop. And then as part of the cleanup, we'll just close the application. For that, I'm going to type Windows, and here you will have an action called close. I'm just going to expand it here and then I'll drag and drop it here. Let's identify the application which we want to close. Click on application, select refresh, and then I'll select the employee database. So now the cleanup part is done, and also we are going to loop this for 10 times. I'll click on save. Now let's run this bot and check how it works. Before I run this bot, I'm just going to close my browser as well as the Windows application. I'll go back to flow view just to take a look how it looks like. As you can see here, all the steps are there within the loop and it's going to run for 10 times. I'll click on run. Now it'll take some time for it to perform all the steps and also to navigate for the 10 iterations. So we'll just wait for a few seconds and then we will continue with our discussion. Now, as you can see here, the bot has completed its execution and it has accurately captured the data for all the fields and updated here. I know that this is not the fastest time this bot can complete in, but this is how we wanted to show you how you can build a bot and then complete this challenge. So now let's talk about what are the other alternate options we have and how we can speed up the time as well. The first option would be to use web automation package. There was a specific video created on how to use web automation package. So if you could take a look at that, it will be easy for you to see how you can use that and speed up the bot execution time. That is one option. And the other option is like we use the JSON object manager to read the different key value pairs from the JSON response. You can also do that using string package and then you can extract the text. That is another option. Also, there is another option when you are using a Windows application. Like you can extract all the fields at once. Let me show you how that works. Let's launch the Windows thick client here. So now I have this thick client. I'll move to list view. I'm going to collapse all these steps and also I will disable them so that I could show you a few other approaches you can use. I'll use the recorder capture action, drag and drop it here. I'm going to identify the Windows application here. I'll select the employee database. Before I click on capture object, I'll go back here. I'll just add an employee ID here and click on search. Now we have all the data fields populated. Now I'll click on capture object and I'm going to identify the entire application itself, not any specific field. So once I do that, it will have the capability to get all the available fields in that particular application. For example, if I go to this actions list, there is an option called get all children values. That means it's going to pick up all the values, whatever is available on that application, and then you can save it into a list. Let's show you how to do that. I'm going to add a list variable here. So by default, it has a variable name called children values. I'll leave it here. Click on create and select. Now let's loop through this values in the list and see what it has. So I'm going to use the action called loop. I'll drag and drop it here and then select for each value in the loop. For each item in the loop, I'm going to select a variable that is the children values and let me assign the current value to prompt assignment. I'll click on save and to see what values are captured, I'll use a message box here and drag and drop it here. And now I'm going to show you with the prompt assignment variable. And let me close this message box after every 3 seconds. Click on save. And now I'll click on run. Now it is going to capture all the information. So here we have only used recorder capture once and then you are getting all the fields. This way you can reduce the number of times you're going to use the recorder capture action and then read through each of these fields. As you can see the message boxes here, it's picking up all the values one by one. So let me speed this up. As you can see, it has all the fields and this would help you cut down on some of the times. So this is one approach on how you can speed up the time. Also, you can use browser JavaScript action if you want to feed in JavaScript and then pass the variables. So if you're using the browser JavaScript action directly from the browser package, then it does not support the variables. In that case, you will have to save the JavaScript and then import the JavaScript and then start executing. Whereas if you are using the web automation package and then there is a similar run JavaScript command which you can use and that supports variables and that makes it a lot more faster for you to execute as well. And we have also seen some other different approaches followed by people. Say for example, you can also use simulate keystrokes to navigate between different fields on the web application. So that way, that is also another option you have to navigate across different fields. I hope this video was useful for you, giving you some idea about how you can build this bot and complete this challenge, and also to use different approaches to reduce the time taken by the bot to complete the challenge. Also, coming up is one more video on the bot store package for tomorrow. Also, there's a live session by Micah and Laura with a recap of what all happened in this week and also with the shoutouts. So please stay tuned for that. Thank you and go be great.